Restaurant Unstoppable, episode 650 with Chef Damien Watel. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, Chef Damien Watel. Chef, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I am feeling unstoppable, but somebody please stop me.
I'll do my best, but why stop you? Why stop? Can't stop, right? That's the way we like to be on the show. So, French-born Damien Watel got his start in the restaurant industry at the age of 25, working for his uncle's two Dallas restaurants. In 1999, Chef Watel opened Bistro Vatel in San Antonio, Texas, which had an 18-year run and earned Watel recognition as one of the greatest chefs in the nation before closing in 2017. Chef Watel's most recent projects, Bistro 9, is the 9th restaurant project Damien Watel has undertaken with collaboration of his wife, Chef Lisa Astorga-Watel, who was just on the show. We loved our conversation with her. And in addition, you guys are operating Bite in Southtown, Austin, and I cannot wait to dive into your story to find out how you got to where you are today. But let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
Well, my quote would be, if it's not about the skills, it's about the character.
It's not about the skills, it's about the character. Dive into that quote and why it resonates with you so much.
Well, because clearly every time I interview someone and, they show up and say, well, I'm the best, I chop this, I can cut this, I can cut that, it tends to fall flat most of the time. So it's not about their skills, it's about their character. If they have the character to come in, work through it, and grow in it, the result's going to be always a lot better.
How do you know somebody has the character in those first few moments of meeting them?
Well, that's the thing. You have to, I guess, ask character questions. I mean, sure, I usually ask, if I give you a rabbit, what can you do with it? If I give you, so I know their skill level. If I, how do you make bread? If you're going to make bread for tonight, or so that right away tells me where they are in their technique, and then after that, it's really about character. So the way they present themselves. I mean, just like people would say, you show up to an interview, you need to look, you need to look your best, really, because first impressions are everything. And so, of course, when you apply for a job, first impressions are more than everything. But then I think, they need to be true to themselves and true to you. And you need to figure out a couple of questions to ask them to see, how they felt about their last job. And, they are left there because...
Yeah, if they start bad-mouthing people, that's probably not a good sign.
Never a good idea, because they're probably one of my friends or whatever.
Small industry, right? Yeah, big industry, but incredible, how small it is when people know everybody in this industry, for sure. So great way to get this thing started. Thank you very much for getting into that. Where does it make sense to start telling your story? When did you know that this was going to be your path, that you're committed to the hospitality industry?
Probably early on, but I mean, it always comes with the way you grow up and your family and your parents and what set of circumstances. For me, I was cooking since I can remember, being 11 years old and being the one to fix lunch at the house at 11. And I would make potato gratin and roast chicken or steak frite or, things of that nature. And even creme brulee, I have a mark here on my hand that always reminds me of that. It was caramel when I was 11 years old, making some creme caramel at a friend's house for the parents.
So you were French born. How long were you in France? Was this all happening in France?
Yes, so I grew up in France. My dad was an architect, so architect. I guess there's an artsy situation that surrounds that, but he was also a gourmet cook and loved restaurants. So since the early age, we all went as a family to restaurants often. We went to good places, and he enjoyed that. So he was cooking a lot, and I just, I was the one to get the bug in the family about, following through with that.
Are there any impressions, any early lessons you drew from these experiences going to these restaurants as a young man?
Definitely. I mean, I was meeting the chefs and, seeing their reaction to to meeting some young guy that was interested in it. It was mostly my father taking me, hey, I know the chef here. I'm going to, he's going to meet you. And when you're young, there's enough shyness not to be too forward. And I wasn't, I have to say, I never asked too many questions. But nonetheless, I saw and watched and observed. So I also had an uncle in Dallas that was in the restaurant business. So as a kid, we traveled also to the U.S., and I was exposed to spending the summer here in Dallas.
I want to backpedal a little bit because you mentioned that what stood out to you when meeting these chefs and these restaurateurs in France was their reaction to a young, the young man or the young woman that was being brought to them. What was their reaction? How would they react to that?
Well, it was always aloof. Most of, and you do, you probably know best. If you go around and see chefs and speak to chefs, you can see that somewhat they're going to be reserved most of the time. I mean, it takes a calm and collected character in order to do that. So, because the pressure of the job is intense sometimes. So if you have a hot temper to begin with, you're just going to boil after the first 5 minutes and you won't make it to the end of the shift. So that's what I felt from these guys, like some sort of aloofness and why are you even interested in this, or just sort of
So is it a positive or a negative impression, do you think?
Neither. I mean, that's what I can remember now from those few experiences. The positive experience came from my friends and I would go to my friends in the south of France that their parents had a house there, and they would invite me. And the condition for inviting me for a week or two there in their holiday house was if I cooked a meal or two for them to invite their friends. I would be 15 at the time, awesome. And exactly. Yeah. And these they could have, I guess, afforded anything, but they would ask me to cook dinner. So I early on, I found that I was interesting to people, not so much by my many degrees in many things, but mostly because I could cook.
What was that like being 15 years old and having these what seemed like influent people coming to your, not coming to your space, but coming to sit down at the table that you're cooking for and getting recognized for that ability to do a good job? That must have been so incredibly rewarding. I would imagine that the feedback you got must have been kind of contagious.
Yes, it was awesome because not only my friends were impressed with that, because nobody could do that. And at 15, we all played hockey together or different things, but nobody really cooked. And so when I went to a friend's house and the parents or the mother would ask me, hey, Damien, how do I cook this, or how, my friend is like, okay, stop playing for a little. I need to help your parents with something here. It took on a whole different degree of importance that way. And I remember even when my friends were going through this or this at college or whatever, my answer was to actually these people, and I'm going to cooking school in Paris. And there was a different level of expectation there. And now years later, my friends are still in the same town. I happened to just move on to the U.S. and I've been here for a while. But with a step back, you can see the progression all through this. Mainly, I think, because of these experiences that I had as a young kid, from adults, going, hey, we need you, and we, wow, you can really do what we like, not kids' food.
But how did that make you feel to have these adults recognize something in you, and like you said, they needed you? What was that feeling to get that recognition and to be needed? How did that make you feel?
Well, that was great. It made me feel important,
right? And
it made me feel like what I was doing was actually worthwhile and actually good, because most of the time people, when they don't like it, they don't say a whole lot, or they but over and over they would solicit me to cook dinner or to do something.
And I point this out all the time because I have this working theory that passion comes from the reward of being recognized for doing something well. And I'm sure doing the actual thing itself, getting enjoyment from that, has passion, but I think it's that what really sparks the emotion is the recognition of being seen to be contributing, to being valued by others. I think that really does a lot for us. But when we need to be valued, we need to be a part of things. We need to feel like we belong, right? And I think that's natural to become passionate about those things that we're recognized for. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Definitely. Well, I agree, except we always undervalue ourselves, like, your job or my job. And I tend to think I'm just simply cooking, and, oh, no, it's so easy to me. The kitchen's my comfort zone. I can handle that. I know how to do it. It's easy. And people will go, wow, this was great, or this was, and you're like, well, it's okay. It's just, it's just food.
Yeah.
It's just something
but
simple.
You bring something up that's really important. And the other part of that is when you see somebody who does something well, and you recognize they have a skill, you have to tell them, because that's how we find our path in life, by other people reinforcing the positive behavior, the thing that we do good, because otherwise we won't know. So it's so important that when you see something in somebody to highlight it, to let them know, because you might be putting them on their path, like these people did for you, for recognizing you and your ability, right?
Exactly. Most kids, I think under, from 16 to 18 or even 20 sometimes have no idea what they're going to do. It's according to, I guess, their school results in general is where they kind of try to steer. But knowing what you're good at and what you're going to do, when you're 14 or 15, it's not. It's not a usual thing, right?
Yeah, awesome, great way to get this thing started. So, at what point did you come to the States?
I came to the States. Well, I traveled as a kid a few times because of family here, but it also exposed me to the restaurant, because I would spend a lot of time, since my uncle had a restaurant in Dallas. I spent a lot of time in the restaurant, so that was early on, since I was probably 13 or 14, and then I went to a cooking school in Paris, worked in Paris for a couple of years. When you go to cooking school, they place you stage basically in a restaurant. My dad had a place in Paris, so I could stay there, but really I worked for 2 years probably for no pay in order to train. So the good thing that comes with that is instead of taking 15 years to do an apprentissage or basically to get your skill set, you get a lot better, because you can go into the best restaurants you can think of automatically, just because you're not getting paid. So a restaurateur or a chef will make a connection with the school and say, I'll talk, every year I'll take your top 3 students for stage in the restaurant. And so you get always an introduction to the restaurant, and then the chef will call the other guy at the other side of the city and say, hey, you want this kid? He's good or whatever. And so you get placed to the better places. And so if you've got training for 4 or 5 of the best places you could, or at least the best you could get in anyway. I've offered to pay in some instances, and they'd still turn me down. But you get an intensive training quicker, rather than I guess I was fortunate enough to be able to do that because my dad had a place in Paris. But otherwise, you'd have to be taking a job or the best you could find for a low pay, and you have to, I guess, struggle through that. That's the curse of the chef, is a chef never makes any money. You don't get paid very much in a kitchen. So, don't get into this business unless there's one goal, and one goal only, is to be having your own place.
Was that your goal when you got started?
Definitely.
Yeah. So, I'm curious. I love this model of this apprenticeship model. And I think that we need to go back to it more. We rely too much on traditional education in this country, at least. Why do you think we don't do what you just explained, passing young people around and giving them that experience and investing in these people? Why don't we do that like we used to anymore?
Food Network?
What, Food Network?
The Food Network.
Oh, the Food Network. I was going to say, what's Putin have to do with this?
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. The Food Network. So get into that.
Well, before, when I grew up, being a cook was a lowly job. It's always been over the years. And, suddenly it became more and more popular. I mean, which is what I discovered as we were talking about earlier when I was a kid, and the parents, and starting to enjoy, and because of course the French culture is a lot about food and going out. But the U.S., when they get after something, they go all out.
It becomes the business. It
Right.
becomes about making money and turning a
Right.
revenue, right? And
Right.
that's what these kids were.
Right.
Their money to
So
go into a system, right?
I think after they started making cooking shows, and multiple cooking shows would become shows, more than actual reality.
Yeah.
Then a lot of people watched those and got the wrong idea about what cooking was and what restaurant were really like. So cooking schools multiplied, and it was okay. It was $40,000 or $50,000 for your school year, and and then basically when you come out of there, these guys
all the money is going towards your education,
and then they don't know a whole lot. You will learn 10 times more in a restaurant than you will at cooking school.
Yeah. I mean, I strongly discourage young people to go straight from high school to culinary school. I think the people that I've spoken to, and I think Chef Charles Clark, the person that led me on to you, is a great example of that. He was 34 years old when he went to culinary school, but you approach culinary school in a totally different way at 34 years old than, say, 18 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go out there, get that experience, and keep your liabilities low. I'm talking about your rent, the things that you own, so you can live like next to nothing. So you can work for free and not have to worry about all the bills you have to pay, right? That freedom of learning is so important. Do you want to reflect on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, Charles and I worked together in Dallas before he went to cooking school. So I knew the guy, I knew his character, and he was passionate. He was completely passionate guy. So even though he was a waiter, and I was the chef, I owned the restaurant, but it was a little place, a hole in the wall.
This is back in Dallas,
That's
right?
back in Dallas. So I opened my first restaurant there when I was 26. And it was on McKinney Avenue back then, sort of a part that was kind of no man's land. And, now it's just nothing but towers and everything over there. But anyway, and so Charles worked with me in the front, and he was just so good at what he did. So it ties into what I was saying earlier. It's all about the character. I mean, the guy was built for speed, and that's in that matter. I could have, it was not my character. I couldn't go to a table and and sell him the entire menu. Charles can. He has that personality. People just connect with him. He's friendly. He's got that approach, and to me, the quiet behind the walls of the kitchen was more my domain. Mm-hmm. So I mean, we got along well because I stuck in the kitchen and he was up front. Now he multitasked and went to cooking school, I believe, in Spain. I don't know if he went in Houston or Spain, but and he worked in Spain as well, and came back with the same passion that he had for the front into the kitchen. So it made him a great guy to be a restaurant owner because he had both sides. Yeah,
and we're fast forwarding into the timeline a little bit, and that's fine because this is great. But when you come across somebody like Charles Clark, and then you see they have that passion, you see that they have that character, what things do you do to support them in their career? How did you guide him at all? Was he guiding himself? How did you influence him? He said that you're probably one of his greatest mentors.
Well, I would think I was tough rather than not. I mean, because again, the business is not so much about your skills, it's about your character. And especially owning the business. And if it has to be your goal, because, if you want to make $12 an hour for, the next 10 years, you go at it, and working long hours and weekends and so on, it's not an attractive prospect. So the prospect's got to be, well, I own my own restaurant. I want to do this. I have the passion for it, but when you open the doors, then you discover that it's not about your cooking. Well, I mean, sure, it has a part of it, but everything else in a restaurant, managing staff and accounting, and it becomes more about everything else than that. Mm-hmm. So the multitasking aspect of it is huge. And so I remember, my days with Charles. I mean, sure, we'd go out, together after the restaurant would close or whatever, but I remember having to let him go a couple times and come back and be tough on him, or just so that he would realize that his ongoing personality, his jovial side, he needed to have a serious edge to that and understand why there was the need to be so serious. I mean, when you work somewhere and just collect tips is one thing. When you're the one that has to write the checks and not sleep at night because you don't know if the next day you're going to make it or not, it puts humility into you.
Yeah, and how do you have that discipline to correct somebody, to discipline somebody who is becoming your friend, who you're willing to go out with and socialize with, and how do you walk that line? How do you find that balance between mentor and friend? And you pick up what I'm trying to put down there?
Yeah, and that's not easy at all. I mean, even here, I try to hire a pit bull for a manager. It didn't work in the end because actually it was too much of a difficult person to work with, because I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to be behind everybody all the time. Say, don't do this, don't do that. And in the back, don't throw your cigarettes on the floor. Don't in the front, don't do this, don't do that. It's the unfun part of the business. It's just
to be that constant pressure, correcting
you
people.
Feel like you have 25 kids constantly every day and you just have to be behind. And if you don't do that, then human nature has it that sure, you slack, and sure, you're on your phone all the time. I mean, these days people are on their phones all the time, and it'd be nice to have a giant box where everybody puts it in, and when they walk in, and at least focus on how to please people, because that's what the business is about. Anyone that walks in through the door, how do you please this couple or this four top or this group, this family? And so the first one is the hostess, and the second one is the waiter. Third comes the food.
Yeah.
And if 1, 2, and 3 were good, and 4 is pretty good, you got a chance of them coming back.
I'm loving the conversation. I really am. Up to this point, I really am loving the conversation, but I want to kind of backpedal a little bit before we start going more into the future, because we have to talk about your uncle, his influence on you, because you came to the States. He was really the first full-time, long-term job you had, right?
Right.
So what did you learn from your uncle? What's his name? I'm sorry, I should probably
his name is Jean Rubedet.
Okay.
So he was Basque, Spanish Basque or French Basque. It was on the French side. So already just the wild character that comes with that. And he moved to Canada and then down to Dallas later on. And that's where basically I knew him from when he was in Dallas, and he was in the restaurant business. So he was a hot-tempered guy, but undeterred and always just believed that he could do everything. So he was a guy that would climb a mountain if you'd ask him and say, "Oh, sure, I can do that."
So how long did you work for him?
Probably about 2 or 3 years.
Okay. So we're always trying to get a sense for his character. He would climb a mountain if you asked him, right? Mm-hmm. What are the things you learned from your uncle? How did he influence and form who you are today?
Well, that, you don't just wait for things to happen, that you have to make things happen. And you have to be, very strong about your feelings for something and your desire. If not, it's just not going to happen. So the way they opened restaurants, they took enormous risks, and we all know restaurant business is extremely risky. So just that in itself, to me, after growing up, going to school and cooking for people that enjoyed what I was doing, suddenly it's the brutal world of owning a restaurant, and owning a restaurant comes with
the risk,
lawyers, mad customers, mad employees, rush hour, craziness, chaos from one way or another, and sometimes reward from, meet, Elton John that's sitting in the dining room, or, the reward of meeting all kinds of people, and the natural reaction from people that you feed, like, it's like, like I'm your mother, I'm feeding you and you're enjoying what I'm doing, and suddenly that opens all the doors, from whoever, I don't care, however famous you meet, from presidents to whatever, they open their doors and mind to you much easier because you take care of them, and they are, for some reason there's a natural reaction to that.
I want to reflect on this. So you learned the risk reward balance, right? You saw how much risk it actually takes to get involved, but then you also saw what type of reward, and beyond just the monetary reward. I think a lot of people forget that there's a lot of other assets that come with this line of work, especially if you do what you do well, is you have access to people that you normally wouldn't have access to. And then you get access to their influence, their knowledge, their presence. Take advantage of that, become friends with these people, network, right? Is that something that you think your uncle did? Would he work those connections?
Somewhat. I mean, he did. He was probably a little too rough character-wise in order to, I would think, to get to.
I also don't want to put words into your mouth either. Do you agree with? Was that what you learned, or is there?
No, I mean, I think that part I kind of learned on my own because. I mean, sure, sometimes you meet, but back then, I mean, I didn't spend enough really time in his restaurant to myself meet enough clientele there. I mean, case in point, when I left, I left his restaurant to go open my own down the street. And the obvious problem was that I didn't know anybody. I had been in the kitchen and I really didn't know. I mean, even though I cooked for 3 years in there, I didn't really know too many people. So the first day I opened, no one came. Yeah. It ties back into what we were talking about a minute ago. It's just the bold risk and how daring can you be, and how pressing are you going to be to stop at no barriers that are going to come in your way in order to get where you want to go.
So that tenacity is what you picked up from those early days.
Yes, yeah.
Love it. Awesome. We're back, and you were just about to get into, we kind of spoke a little bit about you and your businesses, but now we're talking about you breaking off, opening your first business. What was that first business like? You already mentioned that it was tough because you didn't know anybody. What else made it difficult?
Well, okay, so when I started, first it was the decision to start. Mm-hmm. Then it was, okay, how am I going to do this? Okay, so looking for a place that was cheap enough and whatever so I could afford it. So sure, I had the chef job, and but of course, what came with that is no time to do anything. So I started, when I finally signed a lease for this little place, that was an opportunity because of, something that was happening down the street development-wise. I decided to sign the lease, and I decided to dive into it. So it took me forever to put the place together because, of course, it was just me. And so after I finished my shift, probably 11 p.m., I'd be in there until 4 in the morning, painting, putting carpet up, replacing doors or patching roof stuff or whatever, because it was an old building that was just pretty decrepit. And so for about 4 months, I did that. They're just about, the guys knew the guy that leased it out to me just gave me 6 months, no rent at first to start with, in order to fix the place. So I gradually did until I was able to.
That's another variable too. That one thing I've noticed about today's age of restaurateurs, I feel like they feel like they need everything to be perfect on opening day. Where the truth of the matter is, perfection is something that we work towards constantly, forever. Early on, just open, right? Just get the doors open and get creative. And that's the other thing I'm picking up from you is, work out deals, barter, like get cheap rent in exchange for putting your time and energy into fixing the place up. You don't have to have your dream restaurant on day one. Just start where you can.
Definitely. I mean,
right?
the smaller the better on top of that.
Why?
Because you're most likely going to crash on your first or second time, and it really turns off a lot of chefs. I had a lot of friends that, did that and crashed and burned, and then it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth for the rest of your career. Then you start looking at, okay, am I going to be a hotel chef or what, because I tried making my own place. And so there's a huge challenge in that, but there's no way to learn about it. And, you can't know where the line is until you cross it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a necessary evil, but you have to learn how to fail before you can learn how to succeed.
You have to learn how to fail before you. I love that. That's great. So what I'm picking up from you is start where you can. Continue to evolve over time. Figure out. You don't know what it's like until you dive in there and start doing it, and you don't know where that line is until you've crossed it. Right. So just start getting that experience. What else were you doing right early on? Reflecting back, knowing what you know now.
Well, I mean, it was that. It was the reflecting. It was exactly the way to do it. Is you don't get a bunch of contractors to do everything for you. You have to do everything that you possibly can yourself in order to not have
Keep
too much skin into it as least as possible, and maybe muscle into it, but not skin. As the lower the cost, the smaller the fall. And so if you do fall, and usually they always say 75% of restaurants fall. Then it won't be from too high.
You can recover, right?
Or you at least you'll learn from your mistakes and say, okay, first time I did this and I did that, and I can see, with a little more experience, you can see where you went wrong and what you would do next time.
So we're talking about a lot of the things that you've done right. What about what you did wrong, knowing what you know now, reflecting back on those early days?
So, to me, the hardest part of the business is the accounting and the paperwork. Because when you're a creative guy, and if that's kind of your character, that's all you like to do. The paperwork, not so much. So, Charles and Grant probably made good partners because I'm not sure about that situation, but if I had to guess, Grant was probably the better office guy than Charles, which was the creative part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a partnership is welcome instead of saying, well, it's just going to be me. That might be, that might be a way to do things on your first go around, is to have a small partnership. Only problem with the partnership is when times go tough, and they will be tough. There is no doubt about it. Then you may have differences with your partner, and it may cause trouble. So
knowing what you know now, what things would you do to make sure that those partnerships go well?
It would be to know. It's almost like a marriage and a divorce. It would be to know where your end,
where your lanes are. Or?
Yes, well, exactly. What your skills are and what your partner's skills are, and where the line has to not cross, and to write out the scenario of what happens when we split up and we get mad at each other. Because if you have that already written, and if you have that already in your mind, when it goes all good and easy, that's not the hard part. It's,
Have you read The E-Myth by any chance? Because the advice you're giving us is literally verbatim, like the first thing to do in that book when setting up a business is to delegate who's responsible for what lanes people are in, and then writing it out and actually having inventory, the name next to it, accounting, the name next to it, like creative process, the name next to it, so everybody knows who's responsible for what, so there's accountability, right? So when things aren't being done right, you can go and point and say, you said you were going to do this. Do we need to bring on somebody else to cover this if this isn't good for you? But like when you have accountability, when you have clearly defined lanes, then you can do something about it, right?
Right, absolutely. But it's just that, it's not a matter of if, it's when, as far as, will there be sparks? Will it go, bad? And will you consider having to close? I think for anyone that's in the business, everyone has had to contemplate that. And those are always the hard decisions and the hard questions. And that's when it becomes tough on partners, is how to deal with that.
So to zoom back up a little bit, we kind of went down to the surface level. The original questions of what did you do wrong, what could you have done better, and maybe found a partner early on to get in the lanes to handle the things that you weren't quite passionate about and quite skilled at, like the accounting and things like that.
So times change. Computers change things. The way people grow up change things. Now clientele gradually, new generations expect different things. Back when I first started in Dallas, and when on the first lunch that I was open, I went to look on the other side of the street at my place and look, what's wrong with it? What did I do wrong? Why is there no one coming today? Because why would someone come in? people have their habits, they already have their plans, life goes on. Suddenly you're open, but short of a mega campaign in the paper and invitations to a bunch of people, and then no one comes in because nobody knows about you. So when I did that, the first 3 months were pretty rough. I mean, it was difficult. Gradually, sure, I'd get a guy here and walking in, and then maybe 10 people the next week, and they would bring some friends, and so that is the time when you have actually almost no one to
get your systems
in gear and to please people to beyond what they would expect, so that they come back and they bring their friends, and that's how you build clientele. Basically, is what we call the word of mouth, because you treat somebody right, they're gonna bring their friend next week and say, hey, you gotta check out this place, we love that, the guy was really nice, and that's the only way. So as you go on in your career, of course things change. I realized I'd do better business probably in Dallas or Houston than I do here, because San Antonio is a bit of a sleepy town, and people don't go out and spend too much like they do in some other cities. So, but I like living here, and also if I go elsewhere, I do have to start over again, because I'm going to a city where I don't really know anybody, and okay, so sure. It'd be harder. Let's just put it this way. Here, I've been here for 30 years. Opening something new, I don't have to work too hard at getting people to come in, because they come in naturally. So it's a different. But when it's your first place, that's the very hard thing to do, is because no one knows of you, of your skills, or anything.
Any other big lessons from that first location in Dallas that you can share with us before moving on to some of the other projects you've worked on since?
Well, it was that. There's a hang on. If you have a good product. I mean, I hung on until I have a newspaper review that came out, but that took about 3 months. And then I was busy for the next 6 months or 8 months after that from the newspaper review.
This is in Dallas.
That's in Dallas, yeah. So in the Dallas Morning News, you used to have the old-fashioned food critics, and they would make newspaper reviews, and everybody read the newspaper back then, and so you would get packed because people followed that. And so I got a pretty good review in the paper, and boom, then I was busy. So, but frankly, if I had to wait another month for that, I wouldn't have been in business anymore. That could have changed my life drastically too.
What's that dialogue inside look like when you're towards the end of your ability to hang on, but you find it in you to keep showing up just a little bit longer?
I mean, it's obviously a struggle. You wonder, okay, what am I doing wrong? I mean, I talked to friends or whatever, and they said, well, talk to a consultant. I called a consultant who came in and told me, you know what, why are you doing this, grilled sea bass and whatever. All the restaurants, if you look at it, burger places or the top places or whatever, you need to change your concept and you need to make burgers starting next week and whatever. And you know what? I didn't want to do that. I rebuffed that guy. Of course, I didn't listen to him. And obviously, in retrospect, obviously probably the right thing to do. Although I don't know, if I had a burger chain today, I'd probably be sitting on my yacht somewhere rather than, than coming here prepping this morning.
There's a great book that addresses this called The Dip, and it basically the whole premise of the book is that oftentimes many people quit just before things take off,
right?
And it takes that time to, you want to hang on to your identity because that's your unique selling proposition. That's what separates you from everybody else. I mean, there's enough burger joints in the world, right? But what makes you separate? Hang on to that because that's your differentiator, right? And then just having that patience, and just knowing that. Sometimes you are swinging and missing, but other times you just haven't quite taken off yet.
Well, that's exactly the name of your show. It's the unstoppable factor. So, I keep doing it, and we call this number 9 here, Bistro 9. Okay, well, I keep doing it because I have tried a couple other things. When I moved from Dallas to San Antonio, I had met some guys who, well, actually, it was La Madeleine. It was a French chain back then, and one of these guys was leaving to open a CD concept, used CDs exchange, CD exchange, and stuff like that.
You're dating this.
So when I was able to sell my restaurant in Dallas when I moved here, and I opened a used CD shop in San Antonio when I first moved here. So because I thought, I'll take a break from the stress.
97, right?
That's 93.
Oh wow. Okay, so there's some time elapsed. Okay.
So so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to try something different because this restaurant business. I'm glad I sold it and I did whatever I did and good. I mean, but so that was my introduction to San Antonio. And what naturally happened is I would go here and eat in the restaurants that I liked in San Antonio, and of course became a repeat customer in the one I really liked more than the others, and that's how I got started. So I met, of course, the chef and the owner where I used to go at first to dinner, and pretty soon they said, well. Would you mind working a night here and there for us when we're needing somebody? And so I started moonlighting. I would go to my CD shop in the day and every once in a while worked at this restaurant here in San Antonio. And more and more and more until someone moved to town with a chain of CD places. And then that's when I said, you know what, I'm done with this. And I closed up shop and dove into the restaurant industry back after maybe a year or so of stunt with my CDs.
So when you chose to dive back in, which restaurant was this that you came back in with the second time?
It was Biga.
Oh, what were you doing differently with this restaurant? Compiling all the lessons you learned with owning your own places, consulting for other people. What was going to be different about this restaurant?
Well, it was completely different because it was a modern approach, a modern approach to food. To me, I've always been more of a classic French style, and they had a very creative side over there at Biga, and it was, to me back then, it was clearly ahead of most other places here in San Antonio, by far. And so I was impressed with what they did. I was impressed with their style and so I enjoyed going there, and I therefore enjoyed working the kitchen there a little bit too. It was different working in the kitchen because, of course, it was discovery again. I mean, when you go somewhere and you're not there every week, day in and day out, you just pop in it, as okay, here, we'll put you in this station. Go ahead. Here's a pair of tongs and a towel and cook for 200, whatever station you're assigned, whether it's the grill or whether it's, suddenly it's just blasting you. It's just like getting on, a roller coaster or a rocket ship and say, okay, here, take your seat. Boom. We take off in 2 minutes. And so you don't really have time to tie your seatbelts on and to ready for it. You just rocket through it.
So what was the name of this restaurant? Biga?
Biga, yeah.
Biga. Was this a solo project? Did you have partners? It sounds like you might have had partners. I'm trying to read between the lines. Was this a one-off solo project, or were you?
Well, Biga was not my place. It was my friend's place, and so that's what brought me back into the cooking from my CD stunt.
Okay, what was that transition like, going from being the boss, being the owner, then to working for somebody else?
Not that it's bad, because it's not about working for someone else, or it's about really what you do and how your capacity and your and the end product of something you do. So, it's the satisfaction of either a job well done or not well done. And that's what, in the end, that's what matters into, I would think, anyone on how their day goes about. So I never thought really about the fact of working for someone or whether that had an impact or not. it didn't on me.
It was just the work itself.
Yes, I mean, all I wanted to do was just the work itself, and you know, and try to keep up with these guys.
So how long were you here at this restaurant before deciding to do your own thing again?
Well, not long, but that probably lasted 6 or 8 months, I guess, during my, you know, during the time where I had that city shop, and then I started looking for a location to kind of restart what I had done in Dallas, a little bistro and some corner. Now I knew that I needed to be where people would eat what I made. So one lesson that you learn when you do your first place, for example, is you don't go sell Rolls Royces in the south exactly, because you're not going to be too popular there. So the first important thing when you choose a location is, are there anybody there that's going to come into my restaurant that lives close by? You don't go fishing where there's no fish, or you don't use a different bait where, you know, none of the fish that are there are going to bite for, you know, going to go for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first.
So, yeah, matching your unique selling proposition, what you do well with the clientele that will receive what you do well.
Exactly. You want to go where they are. And, you know, because people, all of us, when you go out at night, it's like, I want to go as close as possible. If you can go, if there's a little place around the corner, great. You know, if 2 corners, whatever. Every once in a while, you're going to drive 20 miles to go to a place. But, you know, once or twice a year, it's just the 3 times a night people that you want, and the ones who will like what you're doing. Sometimes people say, you know what, I'm gonna put a Turkish restaurant, or there's no Turkish restaurants in that neighborhood, and well, it's not about that there's not any. Is there any clientele for it?
Is there an eclectic enough clientele that's going to receive that well?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's about that. It's about knowing where you're going to be, and is there anyone first. So I mean, that's just basic sales or retail, you know, laws.
Yeah.
Is you don't go put a mall where there's in the middle of, you know, the desert where there's no one to come shop at the mall. So I think that's the first. That's the first thing. So it took me a while to find a new location here, although I knew that after living here for about a year or so, I started to understand the neighborhoods and they, you know, the makeup of their.
Yeah, I mean, you had some presence. You were networking. You knew the area. You weren't just, you know, taking a swing in the dark. You kind of identified. And that's the significance of having roots in a community. Like you
have to live here to understand what happens. You have to know San Antonio a little bit, how people are. They're different than Dallas. In Dallas, they like to be flashy and you know, and spend. In Houston also, you know, but not San Antonio. San Antonio is pretty conservative. Austin, they can say keep Austin weird. It's funky and it needs to be different. You know, Southtown here in San Antonio again is going to be. You need to be eclectic if you're going to go there, or else what's the point? So there's a fitting concept for every spot.
So you're setting us up right now for the story behind Vatel Bistro, correct?
Right. So I started looking for that, and I stumbled on a real estate guy that, you know, said, "Hey, me and a group of guys are looking for an operator. Would you be interested? We've got this place here. It's, you know." And I ended up doing a deal with them, and that was the partnership thing that I got into.
You said 7. I don't. This is off recording. 7 partners.
There were 7 partners.
Wow.
But there was one that was marketing. There was one that was architect and designer. There was one that was. Then there's a couple of money partners, and there was a little bit of everything. It was, you know, like we were talking about at first, well-rounded partnership. It seemed to cover a number of the aspects of the place. But we ended up doing a big place right down the street here that was about 20 years too early for San Antonio. So it had internet stations back then, and you're talking mid-90s, 95. So... you know, there was still the deep computer, and we had a keyboard, and so we made several booths, and people barely knew how to use a computer back then. So that was interesting, but we also had a pool table, we had a fireplace and couches, and we had a big bar, we had a big restaurant, it was like a giant Dave and Buster's of slick slick cuisine and entertainment sort of thing. And it was a little too wild, I think, for this neighborhood.
How long did it last before you had to close the doors on that?
I left before. I think I was there for about 2.5 years, and then I sold my ends to it and opened my little bistro. Then the one we were talking about, that I had an 18-year run on my own down the street. So I think that first restaurant lasted about 4 years altogether. What did this teach you?
What were the biggest lessons you garnered from this experience?
Well, whether there's a way to deal with partners, and if I had partners in the future, how to approach that with that experience.
Get specific. What was the way that you learned how to deal with partners?
I remember one of the more serious ones, actually, that still owns part of the company, that they still have a restaurant around here. That he would tell me I need to compromise. And so we'd get around the table, and this guy wanted this guy wanted that, this guy wanted more staff, this guy wanted more, burgers on the menu, this guy wanted Mexican food, this guy wanted bands on the weekend, and it was a consortium, and I think the main partner would say, Damien, I would say, no, we can't do that because, and they would say, no, Damien, you have to compromise in a partnership. You compromise, and
So you learned how to compromise.
Well, I learned how to compromise, but I also learned that that was not the right thing to do, because none of these guys had any restaurant experience, and I shouldn't have compromised. I should have stuck to my guns, and I should have said, no. At least I've had one restaurant before, and there's one thing I learned about doing that is you don't deviate, and you don't change your
gets confusing
concept in between. You don't become a bar more in a restaurant, because then, so there's a number of lessons that I got from that is, no, you don't really want to compromise, or at least if you're the one that's supposed to run the show, you're the one that needs to, if you're the chief of orchestra, you can't listen to the people that put on the show and the promoters or whatever on how to play the music. It has to come from you, and people come to see your music, not so much the commercial aspect of the rest of the deal. So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind is, what's the real aspect and quality of a place? Is it, if you go to a fast food, does it provide food fast and cheap?
So if you're somebody who's not willing to compromise, if you're listening to this and you're agreeing with what's being said right now, and you want to protect yourself from having to compromise, what things would you have done differently to protect yourself so you wouldn't have to compromise?
Well, kind of when we touched on the subject earlier, would be to select actually people for particular jobs without actually, trying to blend. Well, I'm not going to tell you how to do a radio show because I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I would completely trust in you that you're going to lead me the right way, and not make that up to me, or I'm not going to give you any suggestions on how to do how to do your job, and please don't give me any for mine, even though I'd like to hear and listen to your experience doing that. Nonetheless, don't come here and tell me how to do my job. So I think that's an important factor. And even though you can have partners, you have to be clear on what their role is. And
I think, and I don't want to make assumptions, but it sounds like there was kind of a lack of vision too. Too many different people wanting to be different things. Right. And everybody has to want to be the same thing. Right. You need to have the same vision. You need to write down what the future looks like, and what that, what the food looks like, what the service looks like, and the details of everything. So when people sign up to be a part of this, there's no confusion as to where we're going. Right.
There has to be one concept and one vision, and you have to stick to that and not try to stray too much, because then you dilute the original idea. The more you try to put things in, let's do this, and let's put a band here too. Well, if you put a band, you're going to lose these people. If you put this, you're going to lose those people. If the music's too loud, you're going to use those guys.
Yeah. I think that's the fastest thing that will dissolve a partnership is it's not having a shared vision. When you have partners that people have who have different lanes and can bring a lot to the table, that's great. But when people are all pulling in like separate directions, if you got 10 people standing around a ball and you have 10 ropes tied to that ball and everyone's pulling in a different direction, where are you going to go?
Yeah. And your project and your idea needs to be pure and stay pure. It's like you've got Picasso painting something, and you're not going to tell him, well, I like the way you painted that, but could you change it a little bit that way and make it gray instead of orange? And can you make that boob not round but square? Or you wouldn't want to tell an artist how to do his thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that you need to let go if you're a partner or even an investor, because obviously we always need investors, because a cook never makes enough money to open his own place, so he's going to have to find backing from somewhere, whether it's his family or and the investors should listen to that too. Is, look, if you pick a pony, you have to help that pony by every mean you can to cross that line, that finish line. You don't want to load it up, say, how about this Gucci saddle on it, and how about this, how about you put this on your horse and that, and some marketing signs. No, you want to do everything you can to push that pony across the line.
So let's talk about your next pony, the pony that had a 18-year run, right? This is Bistro Vatel. Take us through that process. What did you do? Now you have you've got this collection of experiences and knowledge. You can go at this a third time. Is this your third approach, or
third project?
Third project.
But this one, second project by myself.
So with all these experiences, what did you do differently to set yourself up for success?
So I, different from the last time, from the first one in Dallas, I picked a place that was already a restaurant before, so a second generation, because that cuts down a lot of the cost. There's already the plumbing, the vanna hoods, and things that are going to save you $150,000 right off the bat, which means, it gives you that 20% more chance of succeeding if you do that rather than go from nothing. So you want to always put everything you can think into your corner and not, diminish the chances, make it harder for people to get there.
I'm not sure if I understand that. You have to put everything into your corner. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you pick a place or a location, for example, that's difficult to get to, all right, well, it's already difficult to do restaurant business, so you already make it more difficult with a difficult location to get to. Then if your place is not open, this and that, then you make it even more difficult to succeed. If you have challenges, your place doesn't have gas, or it's only electric, or parking, or
so you're checking all the boxes. You're making sure that you have this experience. You're going through the checklist. You're considering all things, right?
Right.
So one of the things you mentioned that was right about this location was that it was turnkey. Your operational startup expenses were low because you could move right in. What else was right about this location?
It was also on the other side of the neighborhood here, which was lacking, actually. I had a good clientele and my kind of clientele, and but it was lacking anything like that. So again, it was not pretentious. It was sort of hole in the wall looking, but I quickly rounded up a serious group of regulars that enjoyed what I was doing.
What made this process? How did you get these regulars so quickly? Did you do anything different, or was it just now that you had a reputation because you had presence in that community? Did that have something to do with it?
Well, I had a little bit of presence in the community, so I had already made some contacts, but mainly, I think what helped me is I was next to a cleaners.
Okay.
And cleaners have people going in all day long. So if you're in the cleaners next to a wealthy neighborhood, and your clientele, is that you're targeting is...
We're not talking about a laundromat. We're talking about a cleaners.
Right, not a laundromat, a cleaners. Actually, there is a laundromat next to it, which I'll get into that later. I think that exposed me. These people were dropping the clothes off from the nice neighborhood that was right next door all day long. Were exposed to, oh, there's a restaurant coming in here. Oh, okay. And they ask questions, and then every day they would see. And so I was very visible because I was next to pretty much an anchor, I guess. It's a small anchor. It was a small cleaners, but nonetheless, most of the people in that neighborhood would stop at that cleaners. So I got exposure to that, and I think that was, even though small and insignificant it may seem, if 100 people a day passed by that cleaners, I was exposed to 100 people a day because my door was right next to it.
Yep.
In a small shopping center.
Smart.
So, it's small, but again, it's one of the details that you want to add up on your list of how to have your best shot anyway at being somewhat of a success is to check those boxes one by one.
So just to recap the big lessons, obviously the turnkey we mentioned, and now doing business in areas that have business that complement your business. So that if there's a traffic of influent people that have money to spend, now you're on the way. You're right next door. Like you're in that same. You're a part of their habit. Right. You're right there for them. What else do you think went well with this restaurant, this third venture?
Well, I think it was the combination of all these things. So I mean, I quickly got. I think after 2 months, after 3 months, I had recouped my investment. So my investment in it was pretty small. After 3 months, I had recouped my investment. So now it was just about operating it, not so much having to, either pay back or a fine. Of course, that's operating is the hardest part of it. That's because it's got all these moving parts, and someone can give you a restaurant with the keys and hand it right over. It could be the worst thing that you could do is accept it for free because it may cost you an arm and a leg, and you may incur all sorts of liabilities, and you may lose your butt, doing that quickly. So if you're not ready to do it, don't do it because it'll set you back seriously, most likely.
Yeah. So open for 17 years or 18 years. What was it? It was a long stretch.
Right. It was a long stretch.
What was your success to staying open that long?
Well, it was making regulars and in that neighborhood. So suddenly I became the place to go for them, and they would meet their friends from the neighborhood. Sometimes you go home and you get in your house, you close the door, blah, blah, blah. But there, it was kind of like that show Cheers, where you meet your friends. And it kind of became a little social club sort of thing for the neighborhood because they would see, they would see each other and then eat next, basically have a bunch of friends over without them being in your house. So they got used to the chairs, the tables. I mean, that came with other complications when people say, hey, I always want to sit here when I come here. Well, this guy too and this guy too. But,
so give us something that's not as common knowledge when it comes to regarding developing a regular. What's one thing that you did well to develop regulars that not many people might be aware of?
I think we became friends. I mean, not having turnover in your front staff is key because then they start knowing your customers. We knew what people drove when they parked in, by the time they drove and parked, we already had the table set the way they like with, the glass of wine that they like to have, and exactly, and know them by name, and so they felt completely comfortable because it was effortless for them. They just walked in there, they already knew their table, where to sit, how things were, and so having a regular is just the best thing you can do.
So what were you doing to keep your turnover down?
Well, that's the thing. You're not too hard on your employees, and to me, if I would say that's my worst quality, is to be a little too soft on the people. That
strength and a weakness, I probably would imagine.
Exactly, because now so the good part is you get to retain your employees because they like where they work, and where else are they gonna make great tips like that? Yeah, and have a relaxed atmosphere, and so. It's a combination of that, even though most corporate type of places would say, no, you have to have these rules and these rules and these rules and shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And no, but I mean, for these people, it created a mature environment for the staff to come to work, and they themselves they felt like self-employed the same way. It was my place, but they came and did what they did.
They had that sense of ownership too.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I love it. So I mean, there's I think 4 restaurants in between that restaurant where we are today, right? Any key experiences, key restaurants that you have opened or closed, any biggest lessons you've had? And then we'll wrap up by talking about your current projects here with Bistro 9. But any big lessons that are worth bringing to the surface? You meant something about the laundromat being significant. I'm kind of curious about that. Is there a story about the laundromat?
So this little shopping center, this little shopping center where I had the bistro. Next door was the cleaners that took on a small space, and at the other end was the laundromat.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that ran that laundromat, when I became successful at the bistro, were very difficult with the parking.
Oh.
So they chased a lot of my clientele away, saying, "You can't park here. I'm going to tow your car." Although it was a shopping center, parking was kind of free for all technically in my lease. So it was a lot of trouble. They always try to run off, and they ended up closing 3 years later. The laundromat are moving, and I took over their space and opened another restaurant in there right next door to mine, which was Italian, and I called it Ciao Lavanderia, which was goodbye washateria in Italian. And so I even put a washing machine outside at like a modern, funky washing machine. It was a little funky place, casual restaurant. But I figured, since I'm catering to these people in the neighborhood, well, here's the French formal white tablecloth. I'm going to give them something casual so they have an option instead of going to that one or that one or that one. Why don't they come to my other place? And it'll be right next door. It'll be, practical to do. And so I opened this little Italian place.
And that was your 4th venture?
That was probably the 4th venture. Yeah. And that became popular. I even expanded, whatever. And that, then I opened a 3rd one after that called La Frite downtown in Southtown, which was on the verge of becoming a popular restaurant destination in San Antonio. So the lessons from these 3, I mean, the economy was good back then. All 3 restaurants worked. All 3 restaurants made money. I was kind of on top of the world. I was feeling good about myself. People would say, "Hey, the guy with the golden touch. Every time he does something, it does well." Or, how do you do it? And, so it was that. It was just.
What was your answer for those people that asked how you did it? Like, what at this point, what were you doing right?
Kind of the same when we started our discussion. I was telling the parents, "Well, how do you do this?" Or how, well, it's simple to me. That's what I do, and that's my passion. I mean. Sure, I worked in Italian places when I was, training also. And so I grew up eating Italian food as well in France. So it was kind of simple. And then I had the same feeling about opening the Belgian restaurant La Frite, saying, well, I grew up in Lille next to Belgium. I almost went to Belgium every weekend to party and eat at restaurants or whatever as a kid. So I can do Belgian food in my sleep also. So it was my comfort zone. And I did what I felt, and it came from within me. It was all, it was nothing that I saw. I mean, sure, I had inspiration because I think for the Belgian restaurant, I was in Miami and I saw a Belgian restaurant. I was like, of course I can do a Belgian restaurant and better than that because I grew up eating this food and I know exactly what the expectation needs to be, or at least what I expect. I would expect if I went to a Belgian restaurant, and so it just kind of came from within. And so I think that's what is important, is the creative aspect needs to be there entirely, because that's what people go for. I mean, you go for somebody's skill at doing one thing or another, not for some washed up concept that you've seen 100 times. It needs to be somebody's personality when you go somewhere.
So in 9 concepts, any restaurants that just did not work for whatever reason, maybe it was concept, maybe it was relationships, anything that you just are saying to yourself now in reflection, I should have just never even tried doing that?
Well, yes. I mean, the biggest blooper in my life was that after I had those 3 restaurants that were doing well, I thought, why am I taking risk all the time with those restaurants? What do people do that's not as risky? They buy real estate, and they turn around and lease it and whatever. And I thought, you know what, that's what I need to do. So I tried to buy the building there where I was, and the guy wouldn't sell. So I started looking around, and there was the Stone Oak area here in San Antonio that was booming. So I figured, well, why don't I just put places over there, because that place was booming, and there's no commercial anywhere. There's not, and so I bought a piece of land over there, and I wanted to build a little shopping center and do kind of like what I had here, duplicate it, and put a French and an Italian next to each other with one kitchen that sort of split in two. I thought that was a smart idea. I figured, okay, that'll be my retirement. Even if my restaurants don't work, I can lease it out to other people and have an income. And 20 years from now, my shopping center will be paid for, and and I'll have something.
So what went wrong?
And so I thought it made sense. And I started with that. And unfortunately, I opened in 2009 when the economy went belly up.
So just timing.
So none of the restaurants were doing good, not the old one, not the new ones. And I couldn't lease to anyone because no one was leasing any business at that time. It was an economy crash. So I couldn't lease out square footage. The restaurants weren't doing well, so they were, and I did not have deep pockets because I had spent everything possibly I could think
investing
of
in these assets
in that, and borrowed up to my ears to build this project. And so I crashed and burned deeply.
That story could have completely changed if the economy had turned and we had a couple of our best years, and that's the game of business.
Exactly.
It's a risk. You don't know what's going to happen.
I mean, if the economy had kept climbing and the restaurants were still all doing good and whatever, sure. I mean, I'd still own that shopping center, and yeah, exactly. Maybe my dreams would have come true, or at least I could have done what I set out to do.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen like that. So I lost the whole thing, and I got in deep debt. And then I sold Ciao, the restaurant Italian, and La Frite downtown to try and fill up that big black hole that I had created.
And then I think the last restaurant you closed was kind of your namesake, the one that was open for 17 years. What was how did you know it was time to call that operation an end?
I'm happy I did, even though it's bittersweet, because when you have, and that was sort of like my mothership restaurant, that's the one, even when I sold the other ones, that's the one that stayed, and that's the one that had regulars. And but we started having a number of issues with the building, and the building owner just wouldn't have anything to do with it, or remodeling of any sort. So 18 years later, it's kind of important to maybe not reinvent yourself, but you have to refresh.
Yes.
Like a club that you open and it's packed the first 3 years, and 4 years later you have to paint it blue and call it a different name.
Especially the market in 2017, where there's a new restaurant opening every week,
Right.
and like you've got to stay fresh because people in that market wanted fresh. They wanted new. And if you get too caught in your own ways, you're kind of falling in the back of people's minds.
So the big example with that here in San Antonio is the Pearl Brewery. So the Pearl is a huge development that this guy put together, and with a plan to have 11 restaurants. So it was well-funded, big group, and it really set a new standard on where to where to take the culinary destination overall in San Antonio. So I was left to kind of battle with that too. So I needed to remodel. I needed to refresh the concept, and I had paid a couple $1 million in rent since the last 18 years to the guy that I was renting for, and he just wouldn't have anything to do with any sort of remodeling into the building. We had power failures, we had all kinds of issues, and when it's not your building, you have second thoughts about fixing somebody else's.
Yeah. Are these all things that you worked into the contract with the new situation where you are today with Bistro 9?
Yes, because when I looked at this space, it was in worse condition than my place was, and so I was like, "No way! I want to move up in the world, not down." And they said, "Well, if you sign here, if you come, we'll fix it." And it took a while to make that negotiation, but they did, and so they fixed the place.
How do you work that into the clause to make the landlord put money back into the space so you can, or maybe you put money away, you budget a certain amount to stay fresh so you can put some of your own assets into remodeling? How does that work?
Well, it works all kinds of different ways. Sometimes if the rent is good enough, then you can put a little more of yourself or a little more investment into it, because you're getting something that is really worthwhile keeping because the rent is so low for, compared to the market or whatever. Or if you're getting a restaurant that has already, a bunch of stuff and ready to go into it, then, but I think the biggest problem that I saw with this 18-year run is you have a creep up rent. So 18 years ago, rent was that, then it was, 17-year rent was this, then it kept climbing up. And then you become, 18 years ago, your rent is astronomical. Yeah. And it doesn't make sense anymore compared to, you don't know where the economy is going to be at that point or not. It's time to remodel, and you're renting you're paying maximum dollar for what? For this old place that, it really needs a freshening up now. So sometimes it doesn't really make too much sense, I would guess, from my experience, to be somewhere more than really 15 years. Yeah. Unless, there's going to be a plan to, and that would be something I would negotiate with someone if they wanted a long-term lease, or if there's a chance that is to say, okay, 15 years from now, I need to either have the choice to get out, or if I'm staying, then you're going to take part and we're going to remodel. We're going to do 50-50 on the remodel cost, because you're going to need to remodel your business. It's just not going to stay like that forever. And I'm going to need to remodel my concept, and we start over as far as the partnership that needs to be between a renter and his landlord.
Awesome. I've loved this conversation. I just looked at the time. It's almost 10 minutes of the time that you told me was your hard stop. So we got to start thinking about wrapping up. Anything we haven't discussed up to this point, anything that you were hoping you would bring to the table, anything that's near and dear to your heart, get it out now.
I mean, I'm assuming that whoever listens to this blog in general, or restaurant people, without the showmanship that comes with what you see on TV and everything, it's a really hard business. It's rewarding because if you really have it in your heart, I mean, to me, I still love cooking. That never goes away. So I think if you have the love of cooking, that will always stay with you for the rest of your life. I think the biggest part you have to look at is the finance side of it, because that comes and goes, and it's a risky business. But I wouldn't know what else to do. I mean, like I said, I tried a couple of things, during my career, and always to just return to what I love to do. It's the creative process. I mean, I paint also, because when I did my first restaurant in Dallas, I wanted art on my walls, and I couldn't afford to go buy a $2,000 painting that, something I liked well enough. So I thought, well, I bought a canvas and I painted it myself.
Yeah. And I'll show some of the pictures. Are all these paintings your own, or just
most of them?
All right, I'll make sure I know which ones are yours, and I'll make sure we capture those on the B-roll. And the one question I'm asking all my guests before we go to the speed round is, the mission statement is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry by sharing and making an example of people like you. How have you transformed since that man at 25 years old, starting his own business? Who are you now versus that man then?
My dreams are different. So when you're fresh off of cooking school or fresh off your training, you want to have the best restaurant in the world. I think I would think a lot of us cooks that are starting up want that. That was kind of my father's dream too, is to do a place where it was just worldwide known from the. But obviously that comes with enormous challenges. You would have to have large investments, and or at least do something very, very eclectic in order to get noticed, and just have deep pockets in general.
So what are your dreams now?
So my dreams now are to keep cooking, but slow down on the dream factor, and have more stability. So because it's been up and down in my career, so finding a little bit of stability here and building something that not to this, not to that, not too specific, that has enough of a broad clientele that it stays busy, and not just built for the select few. I think that's my goal, to have a more steady lifestyle, because it's a wild business. You know, over the years, you have a different life. It's hard on your family. It's hard on yourself physically. It's hard on your social life, even though you get it in the restaurant.
It sounds like 25 years of a reality check of, the dream is nice to have, but at the same time, security, family, presence, control over your situation is a lot more rewarding than, checking that box that like I accomplished this dream that I set out for, right?
Right.
I don't know.
I think most of the people you see, even celebrity chefs and so on, well, they'll make a name for themselves either on TV or from their first restaurant, but they don't make money out of that. Then they'll open a burger chain or a sandwich place,
it's more practical,
because that's how you make a buck. It's not,
Yeah.
So you make a name for yourself with your hard work and your creativity in your place. And after that, hopefully you sell some pots and pans on TV with your name on it, and that's how you make a buck. So, that's how it goes.
Yeah. We're back, and the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor, a habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success? So basically, what's your strength?
Calm and collected character.
Calm and collected. What's your biggest weakness?
To me, it's still the same thing. It's the accounting, the office, the numbers side of the business.
What's one question you ask or thing you look for during the interview process?
Is what do you do on the weekend?
What are you looking for in that question?
Well, I want to see whether they pursue some sort of like a sport that they do it, all the time, and they have a goal to get to something, and if they climb within their, and if they stick to it, basically.
Got you. What is your biggest challenge today?
The biggest challenge today is to get to where I want to be. So is to soften my dream and soften, the goals that I may have had in the past, and to complete, to stabilize my lifestyle. Although I know I'm going to have to make other places, and that never stops. The unstoppable factor is a difficult side of things.
Share one code of conduct or behavior you teach your team. This is a core value, a way to be, a way to act.
To kind of always think twice before you say something, or before you have to give people the opportunity and the benefit of the doubt. Of course, if they do repeatedly make those mistakes, then that means they're not interested in doing any better or doing. But I think always giving people a second chance at making things right, at least for the staff, because that's probably one of the major concern of the day for a restaurateur is, how's my staff going to do tonight?
Yeah.
Are we going to perform? Is everybody going to be in tune and do it right?
What's one uncommon standard of service you teach your team? So something that's common within your four walls, not common within the industry.
I think is how to be, close enough to your customers, understanding them, knowing who they are. You can't just serve everybody the same way. The standard is never the same for everybody. Some restaurants, they'll say, well, we have VIPs, make sure you take care of whatever. Well, sure, everybody's the same and everybody deserves whatever, but all the characters that you have at your tables are different. You have an asshole on table 1. You have real sweet people on table 2. You have older people on 5. All of them need to be customized, and all of them you need to either walk these guys to the door. This one wants a hug. This one wants you to not talk because they want a minimum of interruptions. This one is to give personal service to everyone and read them properly.
I love it. Awesome stuff. Share one book that's a must-read to make us a better person or restaurant operator.
One book that makes you the one I haven't written yet.
Okay. What is one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
Meet with their friends. I mean, and just sort of hold hands. We have we have a small group here that we get together and sort of self-support. Too many times people think of competitions rather than helping each other. So I think that's what's missing.
That's the backbone of this podcast, is realizing that we're in this together as an industry, and if we're going to share knowledge, and all ships will rise with that tide, right?
You know, even customers should take part in that, because it's their community, and you know what, they need to be supportive by the same
less
token,
transactional, more transformative. I love it. Awesome stuff. What is one piece of technology you've adopted within your four walls that's had a huge impact on operations?
iPads and reservation systems, and obviously credit card processing, those are the biggest worries for a restaurant these days.
Which reservation system did you go with, and why?
Toast, because we know it, because of the half of the crew that I had already has it, and it's pretty comprehensive.
Awesome. And this is the last question. It's a doozy. Get ready for it. If you got the news you'd be leaving this world tomorrow, all the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and for your legacy. What would those 3 pieces of wisdom be?
Life is too short, so live it. Live it the way you intended to anyway.
Okay.
Put more time for your family and friends.
That's 2.
But still make room for your passion and what you do, because that's that's what creates your persona to begin with.
Is that 3?
That's 3. Yeah.
Beautiful. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much, Chef Damien. We wrap up every chap by calling somebody out. That's how I found you. Chef Charles Clark called you out. Who do you respect and admire, maybe in San Antonio or in the greater market, that you think I should get on the show?
Well, it would have to be Bruce Auden from Biga, because that's where I started. At least my culinary experience here in San Antonio, that came from that. So he was the one that inspired me that there was something that somebody could do in San Antonio and delight people.
Beautiful. Bruce, that's twice back to back you've been called out. We're going to get you on the show. And that's it. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge, your mentorship, and everything. How can we connect with you if we want to maybe come join your team, or if we want to pick up the conversation?
Well, we're always looking for good people. That's the thing. And if you have the personality, and I think that's the most important thing, it's the character, the personality. The experience doesn't really matter. You can get the experience by working, but your character and your devotion to what you do is what we want. So if you have that, you're always welcome here.
Chef Watel, again, thank you so much. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable. Cheers.